Yeah, I got that. And also, if anyone comes up with questions for Pat, just go into the Q&A and type them in there, and then we'll catch them at the end.
So I wanted this to be a practical presentation. A lot of times in these presentations, we get a lot of theory and we talk about a lot of concepts, and I want everybody here to kind of come away with some actual tools that they can use in the mountains. A mentor of mine said to me once that guiding is a series of problems that we solve and we flow throughout the day. In mountain guiding, there's a lot of focus on this flow here. And certainly guides are incredible problem solvers, but the flow is really what makes a good ski guide. And that means kind of delivering that perfect day for the client based on what their goals and objectives are for that day. So we're not going to be talking about that so much today, the flow part of it, but we are going to be talking about the problem solving piece, because I think this piece is what ties all mountain travelers together. Every time we go into the mountains, we're solving some sort of a problem, and we might not even know that we're doing it, but we're making a lot of decisions from the time we get in the car to the time we get to the trailhead, to the time we're making a skin track, to the time we're skiing down. And there's a lot of different things that come into play when we're at all of those stages. And so we sometimes think about these as problems that we solve, and like I said, we might not even know that we're doing it. So when we talk about dipping into the toolbox of a ski guide, what we're really doing is we're grabbing techniques and resources that seasoned problem solvers are using to solve problems in the mountains. And so on their own, these tools are not super effective. If you apply one of these things that we're going to talk about to your entire day of ski touring or an avalanche problem, it's not going to work. Where they're effective, incredibly effective, is when you put them together and you layer them on top of each other, and you start to have this process for moving in the mountains. And these tools that we just have a collection of them, and we pull them out when we think we need to. And knowing when we think we need to just comes with experience, education, and doing this on a whatever your regular basis is. So what I've done for this presentation, I think some of the info for this presentation said 5, but actually I have 6 selected points that I took from kind of a seemingly endless list of points. But these are the ones that I find myself using every single day. And I think that they're also really applicable to all of you watching and this sort of a presentation. So dive into that here. Number 1, forecasts. These come in 2 forms when we're dealing with backcountry skiing or riding: avalanche forecasts and weather forecasts. So we're going to look at the avalanche forecasts first. When we tap into an avalanche forecast, maybe that's going on MWAC.org, Mount Washington Avalanche Center, or the Utah Avalanche Center, or the Bridger Teton Avalanche Center, we're not just tapping into a danger rating. We're tapping into so much more than that. We're getting so much information from professionals who are tasked with gathering this information and painting the most accurate picture of the snow as they possibly can. So it's kind of silly to not take advantage of this resource from people who are paid to do this at a really high level. A lot of times, one metaphor I'll use with my students or other people when I'm talking about avalanche forecasts is going to the beach. If you are going to go spend a day at the beach, most likely you're going to check the weather, and you're going to make sure that you're not going to be getting rained on, or it's going to be 40 degrees at the beach when you want to hang out in the sun. So similarly, when we want to go into the mountains in the winter, we check the avalanche forecast. The difference here that trips people up sometimes is that when you go to the beach, even if you don't check the weather forecast, you walk up there and you know right away if it's raining, or if the waves are double overhead, or if it's really cold out. Those are things that are quite obvious and make it not pleasant to be at the beach. In the mountains, things aren't as obvious always. So sometimes we can have really dangerous avalanche problems that live underneath a surface that looks incredible to ski on, and we don't know about them. And it's not as obvious as those double overhead waves that we're seeing when we pull into the parking lot at the beach. So this is where avalanche forecasts become really important. Now I'm going to make a switch here, and hopefully this goes smoothly. But I'm just going to pull up the Mount Washington Avalanche Center forecast. Joe, if that's not going, then just shout. Otherwise, I'm going to keep rolling here. So I know this is a little laggy, so I'll try my best to kind of slow down. But this is today's backcountry avalanche forecast for the presidential range, written by the Mount Washington Avalanche Center. We have some data here on dates, times, author. And then we come to this first piece. This is the bottom line. This piece is a summary. It's the key points. It's the takeaways that the forecasters want you to know before you go into the mountains. It's really the minimum information that you need to take with you before you go about your day in or around avalanche terrain. Unfortunately, we see, and we know this from website data tracking, we see that I'd say most people who 80 to 90% of website visitors are on an Avalanche Center website for a minute and sometimes less. And what we know about that is that maybe they're looking at the bottom line, but what they're really looking for probably are these colors. So let's scroll down here, and we can see this graphic of a mountain. And we have, it's pretty straightforward, but I'll go through it quickly. Higher elevations, mid elevations, low elevations, so separated by elevation. And we have a danger rating. So today we're looking at a low danger rating. Then we have an outlook, so we can look at the trends as well for the avalanche conditions. Tomorrow looks like we're going to increase our danger rating a little bit up to moderate. And the nice thing about this website, this is a new website for this year, and I think it's really nice. It's a big improvement over the last website. What I like here is that we have these tabs. So what I can do without going to a different website is switch back and forth to all of this other data. So I guess actually before I go into that, I'll finish going down the avalanche forecast, which would be good. We have our listed avalanche problem. So what type of avalanche are we dealing with today? Wind slab. Then we have this compass rose feature. This is going to tell us where we might encounter this problem. This is not always 100% accurate, but usually it's pretty darn close. So we have, again, elevation, and then we have aspect. So we know that if we're in Tuckerman Ravine and we're on an east aspect, we might find this problem. Still a low danger today, but the problem still exists. We can also look at the likelihood of a trigger, unlikely today, and we can look at the size, D1. We're not going to get too much into this, we're not going to get too far into these descriptions, and I'm going to talk about this later, but I would highly encourage you to take an avalanche course, a full avalanche course, to understand all of this nomenclature and verbiage. And some more description of kind of the terrain for the day, a up-to-date picture. And then here's the forecast discussion. This is like the kind of the meat and potatoes of the avalanche forecast. So this goes into much more detail compared to the bottom line as to what you're going to find in the snow for this day. We can get a lot more detail. And then there's also some travel advice usually in this section and some events. Moving down a little more, we have some photos. This can really help you visualize what the avalanche problem looks like. It can help you visualize how much snow there is, what the terrain looks like, And this is really helpful if there's an incoming storm. And you can look at the photos that have been taken before the storm hits. And that way, once the storm hits, you have this comparison between what did the terrain look like prior and post-storm. And then we have a weather summary. So scrolling back up to where I was talking about with these tabs here. I love this because without switching pages, we can move across the different data sets. So I can switch back and forth from the avalanche forecast, and then, oh, I want to look at, east aspect mid elevation and just cross-reference that with, what's the, what are the ridgetop winds doing? So I can look at how strong those ridgetop winds are going to be, and I can start to make some connections. I can look at recent observations. These are from not only forecasters and guides and educators, but anyone from the public can submit an observation right here. And I know just from talking to the Avalanche Center staff that these observations are incredibly useful, just because they're not able to get out into every field location at every time. So if you were able to submit just even photos or what the snow surface was like, or did you see cracking, or did you hear a big whoomp, or did you see wind loading? All that stuff is really valuable to the forecasters as they're creating the forecast down the road. So I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, to try and fill one of these out, and you can look at past ones for good examples. Then we can look at the raw snow plot data if we want to. How much snow fell at Hermit Lake? How's the Sherby going to ski? Here I have it right here. Summit weather, and then a little bit of a conditions blog. So a lot of stuff on here. Again, not going to go super far into it. This is kind of for you to now take and run and dive into this and get familiar with this interface and this website and all the information that it has. It's it's probably actually the most important resource that you have. And a lot of the work's been done for you. So that's always good. All right, I'm going to transition back to my presentation. Awesome. All right, I don't think I'm sharing my notes, but if I am, Joe, just give me a shout.
No, it looks good. You're up on the avalanche problem descriptors. Yep.
So actually I skipped over this, but if you check out avalanche.org, get a really nice overview of the avalanche centers in the United States. So let's say you're going to Salt Lake City, you're going up into Little Cottonwood for a vacation. You can find Utah Avalanche Center on here and find the forecast. It'll take you right to the site. Same thing with MWAC. If you click on this little arrow, we're not quite big enough of a forecast zone to have our own blob, but that's all right. We can still access it right there. So great resource if you're traveling and you want to find the avalanche forecast for the zone that you're going to be skiing in. Again, this is something I skipped over. So Mount Washington Avalanche Center is our local center. All right, and then the other type of forecast that we use is a weather forecast. There are tons of weather resources out there. And I've met a lot of different people, coworkers, friends, students, and sometimes they all use something different. But I think at the end of the day, the two big players that I'd point folks to for the Northeast in the Mount Washington area would be Mount Washington Observatory. So the actual weather station that's on the summit, and then the National Weather Service. When in doubt, when you're looking for weather resources, you can go on the Avalanche Center website for where you're going to be, and there's usually some really good recommendations for sites that are good to use. So this is going to be a theme. We just kind of are wrapping up our first tool in the toolbox, the forecast. And for each one of these tools, just going to go over what problems does this tool help us solve. So what problems do forecasts help us solve? It helps us solve a lack of information. So if we're going into a spot that's new to us or that we haven't been to in a long time, then we can gain information about the snow, about the weather, and any pertinent observations that other people have made that might help us in our own decision making. We can identify the avalanche problem type and location. So without a forecast, this can be really tricky unless you have a lot of training. It can be hard to really put your finger on what is the avalanche problem. So going to the forecast is an instantaneous way to figure that out. And then we can understand the trends. We can see what the history has been of these avalanches, and we can see what the trends look like moving forward. So those are just some of the problems that we can solve with avalanche forecasts. And I guess as I'm going through this presentation, a key component, I think a key takeaway is just that the most information that we can get is crucial to our success in the backcountry. So that's kind of why I started with the forecast. Number 2, digital mapping. Mapping has come a long way since looking at USGS quadrants or other custom maps that are printed. I still use printed maps quite a bit. I use them when I'm trip planning. I like having a paper map in front of me on a table with a pen and paper and looking at terrain and drawing stuff out. But digital mapping is a huge place in my career and my day-to-day life. I use this on a daily basis. There's a few different types of digital mapping that we're going to talk about, and they're incredibly effective for planning and also for use in the field. Now with smartphones, we have basically a computer with us at all times, and this mapping, the mobile mapping software has come a long way, even in just the last couple of years. So we'll talk about a little bit of that as well. Here is the first resource, CalTopo. CalTopo is actually a sponsor of this series, which we're excited about. But we're not just throwing their name up there because they're a sponsor. They have one of the most powerful free mapping platforms that you can use. So again, I'm just going to share my screen really quick. So this is the CalTopo site. You can open it in your web browser. It's free. You can sign up for an account. You can see my email over here. And that allows you to save your maps, your layers. You can upload your data from your smartwatch and get it in CalTopo if you want to. So this is a super powerful tool, and I'm just going to run through. This is not a CalTopo course by any means, because you can spend hours on this. If you want a CalTopo course, guy by the name of Mark Chauvin, who's a North Conway local, does an incredible CalTopo course, and I would point you in his direction. But you can see here on the left, we have one menu. We can add different objects. This can be really useful for route planning. Let's say I want to get some sort of a track on my smartphone or my watch, or I just want to look at a route and look at some of the statistics as I'm planning for it. So we'll park at Pinkham, and then we're going to go up the Tux Trail. That's the shirt. Well, there's like 5 Tux Trails on this one. Don't scrutinize me for my nailing the Tux Trail, because I'm not. Now I'm like over on the Raymond Path. I don't even know. But the point here is that we can make a line, and maybe that's all we want to make, but we can make a big route if we wanted to. And we can click on this and get a lot of data from this. So we're roughly up to Hermit Lake. If I click on some of these, I can see profile, vertical profile of the route, elevation gain and loss, and the starting and ending elevation. I can also get terrain statistics. So here I have elevation data, again, slope angle. We're going to talk about this soon. So slope angle by how much of a certain angle you have. This can be really useful if you put a line right down a ski run. You could make that line in left gully from where you're going to start to the floor of the ravine, and you can get some slope data on that. You can also look at the aspect. This is super useful in avalanche terrain. So let's say our avalanche problem is on the west aspects, and we're trying to avoid those. Then, hey, look, this might be a good option. We're now, most of our route, almost all of it, is on an easterly aspect. So this can help us there. There's some more metrics here as well. So that's a line, and you can see there's a lot you can do with just the line, and there's a lot of features here. Polygons, markers. There's custom layers that you can make. You can get really in depth with this software. Over on the right side, this is where we can change our base layers. I like this map builder topo. It gives us some remote sense to data too. We can actually see some of the kind of terrain features underneath vegetation and underneath the topo lines. But we can access also imagery, and we can access, looking at those, we can access the Forest Service maps. I'm not going to switch through a lot of these because it'll be super slow on the Zoom. We're going to talk about one of these features that's super important in a little bit. It's called slope angled shading, but just know that we can toggle this on and off, and we can look at slope angles. This has come a long way in the last couple of years. This used to be not very accurate, and with increased remote sensing and LiDAR, they're able to pick up really small differences in slope angle, not just the average. So this is a great tool. Keep this in mind for in a few minutes. All right, I'm going to shift back really quick to presentation. So the next one to talk about, another great resource to check out, is FatMap. Not going to show this because it's really graphics intensive, and it'll be really slow for you to watch. But this is one to check out. It's also free. It's basically giving you 3D models of terrain and allowing you to overlay some of those same metrics that we just looked at in CalTopo. You can overlay slope angles, which I've done here. Not quite as accurate as what you're getting in CalTopo. These are more blobby, but you are getting a really good idea of this terrain. We can also look at elevation data and aspects as well. The last one we're going to talk about is really quick is Google Earth. So this is a little similar to FatMap. You're getting actually much higher resolution 3D imagery on Google Earth. Specifically if you use Google Earth Pro, which is free, but you just have to download it on your computer. So Google Earth Pro can give you this high-res satellite imagery, and it can also allow you to draw lines, kind of like CalTopo, and place markers. So if I'm looking at a ski tour that I want to do, sometimes I'll go into Google Earth first, so I can actually see what the terrain looks like, and I'll make that line. And then with a little bit of experimentation at first, fooling around, you can figure out how to export that file of the line that you made and get it into CalTopo. So you can use these tools interchangeably, which I think is one of the most powerful things about them. So what problems does digital mapping help us solve? It helps us solve the problem of route finding, especially if we don't know the terrain. We can get on these maps and we can visualize where we're going. whether that's off trail or on trail. We can create custom routes, and we can get a really good sense of what we're getting into before we're actually there. Visualizing the avalanche problems before entering the terrain. This is where I kind of talked about the tools where you can use aspect data, you can use slope angle data, and you can add those as layers. Again, this takes some fooling around in the software, but you can add those as layers and then visualize where the avalanche problem is on an image. That can be really helpful for folks, especially when you're learning to put an avalanche, how do I say this? When you're learning to kind of translate an avalanche problem from the forecast to the actual terrain, this tool is really effective. And then I can also solve the problem of, is this a realistic objective? Maybe I've read about something on an online forum, but I don't actually know about it. Here I can go to Google Earth, I can look at imagery, I can look at elevation gain and loss and slope angles and all that data, and I can say, is this what I thought I was getting into? And is this realistic for me? So that brings us to number 3, which is slope angles. Everybody in the avalanche world, especially in kind of the level 1, level 2 realm of avalanche education, is looking for the silver bullet of, what's the magic thing that I can do to be out in avalanche terrain and get great skiing and not get avalanched. And the truth is that there's not a silver bullet. And that's a hard truth, but I think it's true. But the closest that we can get to that silver bullet is slope angles. Because with an accurate reading of a slope angle, we can be sure that we're either in avalanche terrain or not in avalanche terrain. Now there's considerations here that we have to be careful of, but it's important to know that this is a very important tool that I use quite a bit when I'm in the field and when I'm planning. This is a Swiss graph. I don't have the exact details for you, but it paints a good picture of what we're considering when we're talking about slope angles and avalanches. We can see at the ends of these graphs the extremes of avalanche activity. We almost see almost no activity below 30 degrees. This is a rarity. It happens on very specific problems and specific terrain. Where things rapidly start to ramp up is at 30 degrees. So keep this number in mind. And then we're on this progressive upward trend of avalanche activity up to 39 or 40 degrees. And then kind of dropping off again. And then around 50 degrees, similar thing. If we do see avalanches above 50 degrees, generally there's a kind of rare problem that we're dealing with. We can also, on the East Coast actually, sometimes we get wet or snow, and this stuff can hold on at steeper slope angles. So we do have to be a little bit careful of that in areas like the East Coast, Alaska, Pacific Northwest. But the sweet spot, you'll notice, is right here in between 34 and 45. So this is the sweet spot. So when you have a start zone, or the steepest part of an avalanche zone that's within this area, then we have to be really heads up. We got to think about putting all these tools into play if we're going to be in this terrain, because this is where avalanches are most likely to occur. We can notice that, we can actually, even if we're poking into avalanche terrain, making the right decisions, we can cut our exposure, or we can cut our risk in half just by going from a 34 to like a 32 degree slope. That's so, you almost don't even notice that difference. So keep these angles in mind. This is kind of important. So that 30 to 45 or 50 degree zone is what we're looking for when we're talking about avalanches. So let's look at what that looks like in terrain. This is an avalanche that we came across out in the Tetons a few years ago. If you've taken an avalanche course before, your eye might be drawn to this nice thin spot to a rock where the sun is shining. It's a possible trigger point of this avalanche. And we can see we have this nice steep angle as this terrain feature rolls over into about a 2,000 foot couloir below this. And then what's interesting about this photo is right above my friend here, you can see where the angle starts to lessen and the avalanche started to arrest. So you had the collapse in the weak layer, but the slope angle didn't allow it to get carried off with the rest, but it was connected to this terrain. So my guess is that, even over here, we might be under 30 degrees here, but since it's right next to this slope that's, in that sweet spot, it kind of got sucked right in with that avalanche. And then as the slope angle tapers off even more, we can see that avalanche kind of stopping. The friction is kind of taking over and stopping this snow. But this was a big avalanche. This was cool to see. Let's look at another photo. So this is, sort of different terrain than what we're used to. This is in Aiguille Rouge and outside of Chamonix. It's not a big avalanche slope. You don't have a ton of connected terrain here, but what you do have are pockets of steeper slope angles where you can absolutely have avalanches. And this might be a little tricky to navigate because you definitely have a lot of terrain in here that's not quite 30 degrees. But you also, on a lot of these rollovers, you do have terrain that can avalanche. So, traveling in this sort of terrain can be really tricky and take a lot of skill and vigilance about, what slopes are you under and what's the angle of the slope that you're traveling on. So let's just touch on ways to measure a slope angle. I put this picture on here. I can't remember if this is in Lobster Claw or Right Gully, but I took this when I was caretaking, and it's pretty funny because this looks like it's, 48 degrees or looks like I'm just full on ski mountaineering here. And we know that Right Gully and Lobster Claw are not even close to this steep. So think about that the next time you're looking at photos, because photos can be really deceiving of terrain. Photographers use that to their advantage a lot, especially above tree line. When you don't have that reference point, you can make things look really sick when actually they're still sick, but they're just a little more mellow. So here's kind of the old school method. We can use a map and a map tool. So as a paper map, and this is like a Brooks Range map tool. And if I correlate the map scale to the correct scale on my map tool, and I line this up right here in Chamonix Chutes in BC. So I was looking right in between these two arrows, and I was lining up these to kind of get the closest match as I could. This is a good tool for rough estimates, but if you've spent time with maps before, you might imagine this is actually not super accurate. The other way we can do this is a calculation for average, which is rise over run. So taking the distance, dividing it by the elevation. And here we are back at a digital map. So we can use, like I mentioned before, we can use digital maps to look at slope angles, and we can get really accurate data from this. So it's called digital elevation modeling, and these are some of the programs that offer it. Keltopo, FatMap, Gaia, which is a mobile app, and Google Earth. You can see on here, this is Gulf of Slides. We can look at these different colors, and the different colors, I cropped this photo, but in the interface, it'll tell you what color coordinates with what slope angle. So we can get a great idea of what we're getting into here, where we want to travel, what we want to avoid. And then arguably more important is being able to measure these angles in person. One way we can do that is with an app on our phone. I have an Android, and so this one, Dioptra, works really good. And then if you have an Apple phone, Theodolite works really well. These are, I believe they're actually engineering tools. They have all this data that you can get from your camera on your phone. And so what you do is you point your camera and it gives you some crosshairs here. So what I'm doing here is getting a run out angle. There's a big avalanche slope up above me and kind of far away. And I want to see what the run out angle is and see kind of where the safe zones are around this. So on the right here is my angle. We'll see it's 18.5. That's a relatively safe run out angle. You don't get many avalanches that are going past that. And again, if you're really interested in this stuff, take an avalanche course and you can dive into this. But as well as slope angles, you also get this other great data. You get direction aspect, and you get coordinates and altitude. And then you have a picture of it, and you don't have to remember it. You just grab a picture and go. And then the other way that you can do on the fly is with a compass. So if you notice on my compass here, I have my east and west lines lined up, and this red scale is a clinometer. So if I sight down, let's see, I actually have my compass here. So if I open my compass up and I'm standing on top of a slope, I want to know the slope angle, I can look down the spine of the compass, I can sight down the hill, and then I can use the mirror to read what the slope angle is. And I actually use the compass quite a bit as opposed to the phone. You can do the same thing looking up, but just realize you're underneath a slope at that point. So generally looking down is the way to go with this. What problems do slope angles help us solve? We can define which slopes can avalanche and which cannot. And I'm quizzing you right now. What is that? Yeah, so we're above 30 degrees generally and less than 50 degrees. And here's kind of this quote gets thrown out a lot. I think it's by Drew Hardesty. If stability is the problem, then terrain is the answer. So we can find terrain that allows us to avoid the avalanche problem altogether. The important thing to realize there is that D2 avalanche has just the same amount of ability to kill you as a D4 avalanche. So we really want to avoid them entirely. And then digital elevation modeling helps us solve the problem of inaccurate angle readings from paper maps. So where we're looking at more of an average on the paper maps, the DEM technology has come so far that we're getting really accurate data from digital slope angles. Number 4, Plan B. So these are 2 runs. This is Lemege and Lagrave. This is Lavoot on the left here and Charouz on the right. Huge terrain, massive runs, basically 8,000 vertical from the top of the glacier to the road, huge. These runs are pretty similar in a lot of ways. They're relatively the same aspect. They're generally dealing with the same slope angles, same amount of sun exposure, same elevation, that sort of thing. So arguably having one of these be your plan A and the other one be your plan B is not a good idea, because any problem that you might encounter on one, chances are you're going to encounter it on the other one. So have a plan B that doesn't suck. This is really important because if anything, you don't want to be forced into making that choice of the plan A. You don't want to be up there and being like, the plan A doesn't look so great, but my plan B it's stupid, I don't want to do it. That's not a good situation to put yourself in. And you can avoid that entirely prior to even leaving your car by having a plan B that's fun, that can accomplish the same goals, and that's something that you are you have a high level of certainty around stability, around conditions, and something that you know is going to be easily doable and fun. This is a technique that we use in ski guiding all the time. It's really important to know that a lot of times your plan A doesn't work out, and it's not smart to try and force it to work. So having a plan B that you know is going to work and you know is going to be fun is not only fun for you, but it's important to give that to your clients. So you can be that person in the group who maybe you're going to bail on plan A, but if you've got an awesome plan B in your back pocket, you're going to be the hero of the day. And my advice for this would be, put as much time into creating a plan B as you do a plan A. And even if you don't use it, you will begin to build this library of tour options. And you'll have this library that can give you a lot of variety when you're working with different conditions, different goals, and help you throughout the winter. There's a lot of says my screen sharing was paused, Joe. I don't know. Oh, wait, here we go.
No, looks good here.
Oh. So saying there's a lot of options. There's a lot of tours in my library that they're hard to pull out at certain times of the year. I'm not going to pull them out in January because either they're just not in or the conditions are just really tricky. So create that library, and then you have a lot of options for plan A's and plan B's. What problems can a plan B help us solve? It can help us solve the problem of unexpected conditions or change. Sometimes we get out there and things aren't what we're expecting, even if we read the avalanche forecast. This happens quite a bit. And so being able to adapt to that and say, oh, I've got a great plan B, let's go for it, is a great option to have. Can solve the problem of overcrowding. The avalanche forecast, it's not accurate when it comes to knowing how many people are going to be on your line that you want to ski. And if you have 15 people boot packing above you in something that's steep, that's one of the biggest things I try to avoid in the mountains is people above me, because I just have no control over it. Overcommitment. So it can help us have a good, fun option and keep us from overcommitting to a plan A if it might be unsafe. And it can save us from disappointment, from turning around from that plan A. Number 5, skiing ability. This is not, I don't think, often talked about in avalanche courses, but I think it's pretty important. I think, and this is coming from me, somebody who's a ski coach. So I think maybe I have a different perspective on this than a lot of people, but I think honing your ski ability is something that's super important when you're traveling in avalanche terrain. Being the best skier that you can be at that time is going to be advantageous for you when you're traveling in the mountains. I think part of that is just having full control over your turn. That's one of the most powerful tools you can have. If you come across a red flag, or you come across like a bunch of slough that's kind of pushing you off, it's important to have the stability, the comfort in the terrain, and the ability to stop or change direction really fast. If you don't have that, travel in avalanche terrain can be more dangerous for you. So owning your downhill ski ability is important. What are some ways we can prepare physically for big objectives? We can train for the volume and the intensity of the objective. So we first need to look at what that goal and objective is, and then we need to match our training so that we can get there. If we're trying to ski off the summit of Washington, you know, we should be able to crank out a 5,000 vertical foot day without it being too big of a deal. We can track vertical and horizontal metrics, and then also consider the weight that we're carrying when we're ski touring. The weight of our skis, our boots, our avalanche gear, our food, our layers, everything that we carry gets added on in the backcountry when we're going up these objectives. So if we track kind of like what's the approximate weight I need to carry and how much vertical are these runs and what's the distance, then we can begin to get into some sort of a training plan that is going to help us reach those goals. And then trying to operate at maximum output for any given objective, or when you're operating at maximum output for any given objective, is kind of a good sign that you need more training or you're not quite there yet. It can put you in an unsafe spot to be at your physical limit when you're at the top of a really steep run. And so training to make sure that you're well within your limits when you're doing these objectives can be really advantageous for you. So how do we step out or work up towards bigger terrain? We can develop a progression and a set of goals. We can find representative slopes with lower consequences to kind of work out any kinks in our technique. And if we're not super comfortable skiing 45-degree slope, then maybe we're looking for a short 45-degree slope with a nice clean run out and good spring conditions when we can really practice our ski technique on that terrain before we're doing it midwinter or at the top of a huge run with big consequence. We can be patient. The mountains aren't going anywhere, and this is one of the most important things to a long, successful career as a skier. And then I would say variable off-piste conditions take a lot of finesse, a lot of feel, and a lot of flow to ski. It's a lot different, coming from a resort on groomers and then taking that skiing into variable terrain. You tend to ski it differently, and you have to be ready for the snow to change and for there to be obstacles. And it's definitely a different ball game. So easing into that is really important. These are just a couple charts that I use sometimes with students. So on the top here is kind of a goal outcome diagram here. So we have our process, which is how we train for the goal, what our steps are, how are we going to get there. We have our actual performance, where are we at, what's our skiing ability, and then we have what our outcome is, and these things all overlap. And then down here, this represents the kind of growth model. So in the middle is our comfort zone. Out here, we step just a little bit outside of our comfort zone and we're in our growth zone where we're going to learn. And we might be a little scared, but that's where we grow, is where we're in that area. But if we step out of that and we're so far outside our comfort zone, then we're in this panic zone. And you certainly don't want to be in a panic zone at the top of something that you've never skied before. So this is why my theme here is just kind of slowly working up to bigger and bigger things, if that's what you're going for. And then this is going to be really choppy, but this is a video of one of my students from a couple years ago. This is a St. Antoine Couloir, and she's 16, and she has confident, strong technique, but at the same time, she has full control over her skis. If she needs to shut down her speed immediately, she can do it. If there's an obstacle in the way, she has the finesse and the feel to get around it. And we're not on the Free Ride World Tour, but we're just, we're looking for smooth, good, confident skiing. What problems does skiing ability help us solve? It can help us solve hesitative or apprehensive skiing in the terrain. It can keep us from falling. And it can help poor or slow reaction time to unexpected hazards or red flags. And, you know, when I was caretaking at Hermit Lake, there's a window right in the office where the caretaker's desk is, and there's a pair of binoculars there. I would spend a lot of time in those binoculars, just looking up at the head wall and up into the top of left gully. And there's nothing more terrifying than watching a skier who's not confident in the terrain at the top of some of those runs. And sometimes those turned out to be rescue calls, and sometimes they didn't. But you know, this is where some of that is derived from that I'm talking about. All right, the last one, I know it's cliche, but the brain is maybe the most important tool that we have. I don't know if there's any Game of Thrones fans out there, but this is a Tyrion quote. A mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone, if it is to keep its edge. That is why I read so much. So every avalanche professional and guide and mountain professional that I've ever met, and most professional skiers that I've ever met, openly consider themselves a student of the mountains. And I think when we're trying to do this for our lifetime, it's really important to keep that mindset and to continue learning and to continue asking questions and not get sucked into the expert halo of thinking that you know everything, because nobody does. So this is just an example. I have made this diagram, and it's based off of something that Rob Hess made, slightly different, but it's just an example of all the decisions and the different options that we have when we're traveling in the mountains. There's so much to think about. And there's this continuum of decisions and techniques and things that we can do. And it's all happening in our brain. All of those decisions are flowing in and out. And as we go higher, we have to make different decisions. And, you know, we have to remember that at the same time, we've got to communicate effectively, not just in our own head, but to our partners. There's so much going on. And again, I'm not trying to get into the technical side of this. It's just an example of you know, how many steps and decisions and options are. And even though the mind is one of the most important tools, it can also play a lot of tricks on us. So I would challenge all of you to ask yourselves, what are your own biases and your own heuristic traps that you fall into? You know, some people don't have any issues with one, and some people have, you know, most of their issues with another. These are just a few examples. Scarcity is like when you're riding at the resort and it's a powder day, like you're racing to get tracks because everybody's getting up the chair with no problem. So you are like moving at a really high speed, you're cutting people off, you might ditch your partners, you're trying to get the powder. In the backcountry, you know, that attitude is a killer. That can be really dangerous. So is scarcity one of your heuristic traps? Are you really like somebody who's trying to go for the powder over everything else? Familiarity is the big one, especially on the East Coast. We don't have a ton of big alpine terrain, and you know, a lot of the locals have skied almost everything, and it's easy to get familiar with that terrain and feel like you've seen it all. And once you fall into that complacency, that tends to be when you see something that you haven't seen before. Commitment. Are you kind of all chips in, going for plan A, shred or die? Or is that what defines you, or are you open to saying, "Oh, that's okay. I don't need to go for my plan A. We got a great plan B." Social facilitation. That's like social pressures. Like if you're seeing stuff that people are doing on social media, if you're hanging out and there's people on the floor of the ravine and it's April and they're all jumping off the head wall, do you feel pressure to go do that because everybody else is doing that? The expert halo. Do you have this idea that you've seen everything, or do you have this perception that you're with somebody who you think is an expert, and so therefore nothing can happen to you. And then hindsight bias, this is just like saying something was expected after the fact, but in reality, in the moment, might not have been so obvious. Again, these are just a few of the things. You know, one thing, and I'll just throw myself out there because this is important. One thing that I've identified in myself, especially through my own guide training, is this idea of expert halo. And it was never like myself. I'm never somebody who thinks that I know everything or have that attitude personally, but it was more like by association of the people I was training with. So whether that was other people in my courses or friends or mentors, that I felt like because I was with them, you know, we're good. And, you know, so often that might not be the case. So this for me has been an important one to keep in check. So how do we invest in our brains and in our mountain education? Here's where we tie it back to everything. Taking avalanche courses. This is the next step. If you haven't done this yet, I'd highly recommend taking a course that's audited by the American Avalanche Association, and that's through a provider like ARI or American Avalanche Institute. You can go with guide services. You know, you don't need to take a formal avalanche course to learn about avalanches. You can say, hey, I want to hire a guide for 3 days, and maybe it's one-on-one or two-on-one. And I want to go learn about avalanches, and then I want to apply that in terrain. I want to get a hands-on practical view of like how this stuff works and how we can use this knowledge and these techniques in the mountains. So plug for EMS, check us out. Gaining experience, just time in the boots and digging in the snow, skiing a lot, making observations, writing things down in notebooks. These are all crucial. Mentorship. This is a hard one. Everybody's big question this year is like, how do I find a mentor? And it's hard. And I didn't have a mentor at first. Like sometimes it takes a little while. You go out with partners and you make yourself available in the greater community, and eventually the connections that you make, people you hang out with, they're going to lead to mentorship in some form or another. And then here's my last slide that I like to end on. And I created this chessboard because I think that traveling in the mountains in the winter is in a lot of ways, it's similar to a game of chess. You can draw a lot of parallels here. So what I did is, you know, here's the mountain on there, the black pieces, and here's me. And these pieces now, these are all the things I can control. And one is not going to win the game, right? I'm not going to pull out slope angles and like have that be my only card I can play, my only piece. I've got to combine it with all of those other things and work together so that all of these pieces are acting simultaneously and they're playing off of each other. So just to run through them, you know, here's me and here's my ski partner. This happens to be my real partner, Becky, but this could also be just your ski partner or the group that you're with. The two most important pieces on here by far. Then your skiing ability, you hold close to you. You hold your avalanche rescue tools close to you, beacon, shovel, probe, every time. Communication, so this doesn't have to be a radio, but it can be, and it's the thought of just how do you have good communication in backcountry, in the mountains? How do you make sure that your partner knows exactly what you're talking about, that you're gonna go from here to here and not from here to here? Patience here is represented by this hourglass. I can control that. Avalanche course, I can take an avalanche course. My slope angles, I can control these. This is exposure, and I can control my exposure. And I don't mean being naked, I mean, you know, how exposed am I on a big slope? Am I above a cliff? Am I below Serac? Am I above a crevasse or a glide crack? I can control this. My observations. The avalanche danger, the avalanche forecast. There's 2 for the avalanche forecast here. That's important. Digital mapping and trip planning. And then my field book, taking notes. These are all the things that I can do to play this game of chess and win. So thanks everybody for listening. That's all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. I have my email on here too, so feel free to reach out if you have any interest in working with EMS or CVA or my consulting company, Gravity.
We got a couple questions, Pat. The first one is a relatively long question, but it boils down to you talked about kind of slope angle and the connection of terrain, and he's asking specifically about, he or she is asking about looking at a recent incident out west, while a slope angle where most of the skiers plan to regroup was something between 25 to 30 degrees, yet connected to steeper terrain that was much steeper terrain. And then it would have averaged out to like the mid 30s. Is it, let's see, I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a bit with the consideration of if you can mention upslope connected slope angle consideration. I don't know if I'm really explaining that very well.
Yeah, no, I think I understand the spirit of the question. The graph I showed you is that data specifically is looking at the start zone. So it's looking at the steepest part of an avalanche path. And that's typically where you have the most stress and forces on the interface, the weak layer in the snowpack. And so because it's the steepest part, you know, the most kind of sheer force is, that's where it is. But once you initiate that avalanche, once you have a failure in the snow and that propagates across, all the avalanche has to do to run full path, not just that one piece of terrain, the start zone, is it has to overcome friction of whatever the bed surface is. So slope angle has a huge part in that. We kind of saw that in that picture I showed up. The other part of that is the bed surface. So is it a really slick bed surface? The depth of the avalanche can also play into that. So if you're able to initiate that failure, it propagates across, you know, the start zone is the steepest. That might be where it initiates, maybe not. But as long as that terrain that's around the start zone is all above 30 degrees, that whole slope has the potential to go. And it might not all go. There's a lot of different factors that go into that, but it certainly could. And then the other piece that maybe was a little confusing, but I don't know if they got caught or whatever, but just thinking about, you know, if you're on a 30-degree slope below this area, just because you're on that 30-degree slope in space doesn't mean that you're out of danger from anything that's above you. So if you get an avalanche that's running from above you, it's going to carry momentum and force, and it's going to run across angles that are less than 30 degrees. It's really, you know, when I'm talking about that 30 degrees plus, that's where I'm talking about you can trigger an avalanche. But once that gets going, you know, I'm sure people have seen videos of avalanches crossing roads, going up like crossing a riverbed and then going up the other side of the mountain. So then you're having like this inverse slope angle that the avalanche is traveling on. So as long as you have that trigger and the avalanche is going, it can travel through terrain that's under 30 degrees for sure. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and just kind of throw in one more addition. I think it also depends on the percentages. Like if you're in a place where most of the terrain is 20 to 25 degrees, and then you get into a 35-degree slope. It's vastly different than if you're in terrain where it's mostly 40, 45-degree slopes, and then there's some 35-degree slopes. So it kind of goes back to what you were saying, but it takes all those pieces and parts to put it all together.
Absolutely.
We got another question. What's something that you've learned as a guide teacher that you probably wouldn't have picked up as if you were just a recreational skier?
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit at my, there's definitely a few things. I think the thing that stands out to me is to slow down. It took me a really long time to just calm myself down, to slow down both in when I'm trying to ski objectives and in my mountain travel and in my decision making. At first, like I'd say when most people get into the sport, it's kind of go, go, go. Like you're coming from this background where you're riding lifts and you're moving fast and you don't have to think about what's around you. And that took me a while to learn. And a lot of that learning happened when I was caretaking, but a lot of it happened through my guiding as well. And just, as you do more, you see more, and you realize that as many observations that you can make and as little things that you can miss while you're out there is what you're shooting for. So in order to do that, I slow down and I take an extra minute and I'm not talking like an hour. I'm talking like, you get to the top of your transition and you just take a few minutes and you look around and you feel the snow and you ask all those questions that you go through checklists that you might learn in an avalanche course. And you just take the time every time to go through a process and to slow down and make sure that you're making the right decisions.
And one more question. It goes back to your chess analogy, and I guess I'll kind of rephrase it, but basically, if you were playing chess and you start losing pieces is kind of the analogy, but I think that doesn't really translate well with a toolbox that you've created. So maybe a better way to slice that up would be how, a lot of the audience or some of the audience is probably, first season, second season out here. Out of all that long list of tools that you put up there on the chessboard, and maybe take skiing skills off the table, what would be like your one or two to focus on to develop sooner than later? Like focus on maybe your first, second season.
Yeah, I'm just going to pull up the, there we go. Yeah, it's a good question, and checkmate, because you got me there, because this was kind of more of a metaphor that I'm trying to use. But yeah, if you can focus on a couple things as you're starting out, that's a great question. Certainly these tools are essential, right? The rescue tools and the knowledge of how to use them and get your partner out are invaluable. There's no way around having these and knowing how to use them. This is a must. And then from there, like I said, the avalanche forecast, super important. That's, a lot of the work there has been done for you already. If you can consistently go online and check the avalanche forecast, you have access to a wealth of knowledge, a huge library of information about the terrain that you're going to be in. So knowing how to be on that website and use that effectively is important. And then I think the other two that are so hard because each one has a place, right? I think the other two that I really point people to is patience, like I was just talking about, and then good communication. So when you're in a group, when you're with your ski partner, just being able to communicate effectively with that person is really important as you're moving through the mountains.
Yeah, so maybe the takeaway is it's not checkers, it's really a chess game.
Oh yeah,
And
this is chess. Sorry, not
no, I
checkers.
mean, like ski mountaineering is not checkers, it's chess. It's complicated. It's
Yeah,
got a lot of parts, and there's a lot to know. And you don't just pick up chess and start playing, right? First day you don't start winning. And I just wanted to add on the beacon probe and shovel as a first most important piece. I think that kind of opens up doors with other people that you want to ski with, because when you have those skills, then you become not the new person that just rolled into the mountains and doesn't, is kind of like, yeah, you can come along with us, but do you have a beacon probe and shovel and you know how to use it? So that kind of gets your foot in the door, to get out with other people that, it's just difficult to take someone out in the mountains without that basic set kit. And then we'll finish up. This is a tough question. Last one from Joe Miller. Does that ring a bell? He wants you to wear maybe a UNH hat or shirt next webinar.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh
maybe you can work on that.
I'm wearing a Hopkins shirt. Sorry, Joe. Yeah, my sister went to Hopkins, so representing.
Okay. We got one last one. If you're dropping into terrain that you didn't go up, for example, starting on the west side of a mountain, then skiing the east, what observations can you make when determining safety? Obviously, the forecast weather would be helpful, but what other factors are you considering? That's a big question.
Yeah. Yeah, that can open up a big can of worms. So, that's a question that is tackled in formal avalanche education, but in general, you're looking at the snow, you're looking for red flags, you're looking for changes on the snow surface that you can see. You're looking to see how it reacts with your skis. That's a tough question. That's a little bit outside the scope of the avalanche awareness talk, so I don't want to get too far into it. I don't know if you have an easier, broader way to answer that question, Joe.
No, it's just such a huge question. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about, right? Developing all those tools, getting all those skills, and knowing how to ask those questions. And it's regardless of whether you're obviously not going to get as much data if you don't go up something and you come in from another aspect and another route. But again, that's complicated.
That reminds me of when I talked earlier about people are always asking what is the magic bullet. That's kind of one of those questions, and there's not one, right? It's a combination of all of these different tools that we have and the skills and the knowledge and experience that we have to move through the terrain.
We got a few. So here's more of a comment from someone with some experience in kind of group dynamics. And let's see, when trying to help reduce the expert halo effect for either me or my travel partners, I like to make the decision-making process interactive with specific questions to the group members. Similar in his job, holding interactive briefings led by a supervisor before getting out into the workday is kind of that same thing. If anyone sees something or thinks something's unsafe, they can stop. They have that kind of, the group has decided like everyone is going to speak up. It's not like there's one person in charge. It's every person has an equal say. And these are great comments, going back into your comments about brain and those heuristic traps.
Absolutely. That's a really accurate comment. I try and adapt some of those same things into my programming. I think that's a really important thing, not just in a formal, guided or education group, but that's an important thing to foster in any group that you're a part of. If it's a group of friends or a group of strangers, asking the people in your group, not like, are you good? Are you okay? Not yes or no questions, but like digging and saying, what's your opinion on this is a better way, because then you're actually giving them the platform to say you know, what are their observations? What perspective are they looking at this from? And that can be really valuable. And that's where, if you're able to foster that, you know, you're going to miss less things with more eyes and more people. So yeah, great comment. And I would say, you know, that's a good thing. I'll put a plug in for Blake's talk next Thursday. Blake's doing a talk called Barriers to Cognition, and it's more of a specialized talk dealing with a lot of those human factors, heuristic traps. It's going to be super interesting. Blake have a PhD or master's in psychology?
He's got a big brain. That's all I know. He's got a good way of presenting.
Yeah, he does. And so I would really encourage people to check that out next Thursday. It's going to be good.
Well, the rest of the questions are either heckling or some comments about how good it was at Wildcat today. So
yeah,
we'll pass on those.
Thanks, Kevin, Ryan.
There was one question. This was recorded along with most of the other talks that we've done, and those are all housed on the Avalanche Center YouTube channel, and that link is on their site. Where's that under resources, Pat?
So, sorry, I was reading the comments.
The recorded sessions that we've done in the past and this one live on the Avalanche Center YouTube.
They're on the Mount Washington Avalanche Center YouTube. So you just go to the Avalanche Center YouTube page and they'll be in chronological order.
And then I think the last question was, when will the Avalanche Center be on TikTok? All right, enough.
I know who to ask.
Okay.
I know Frank will love that question.
All right, well, it's 8:22. Anyone have any other questions? We're gonna wrap it up. All right. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for putting that presentation together and kind of threading the needle between the technical side and the approachable side. It seemed like a really good way to reach our audience and mix it up. I think some of these talks have definitely been at the technical end of things, and this was a nice mix. So we'll see you in a couple weeks. You're doing another presentation, is that correct? Or we'll get that schedule out.
I'm doing another. Yeah, well, the schedule's on the website. Blake's next week, and then I think the week after I'm going to present this again and refine it a little bit.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick, you got any more shout outs for anyone?
No, just thanks everybody who showed up. And I know a few people in here, so it's good to see you here. I appreciate it. I hope to see you guys out in the mountains.
Sweet. Good night, everyone.
Good night.